Welcome, you Zoomers. Welcome to the world famous Sail Power Steam Museum. I don't have, I got something else on the screen here now. Anyway, Sail Power Steam Museum, South Rockland's finest maritime museum. No question about that. I'm Captain Jim Sharp. This is my little wife, Meg, alongside me here. What would we do without a good woman to keep us going? And I'm not going to dwell very long on the commercial because you've probably all seen this before. But for you new guys, we are a 5-star museum right on the south end of Rockland, and you got to come and see all the wonderful memorabilia we have there. We're so busy. It's just amazing how busy we are, and I'm loving it all the time. The first thing we're doing, as soon as I get back there, as soon as the winter goes away, we got our foundation laid for our new building. We're putting up a boathouse, wonderful boathouse, where we're going to keep a whole lot of antique boats. We have this, you can see the rendering down here on the right-hand side. That big door is where our steamboat's going to go. We have a 42-foot steamboat with a stern paddle wheel on it and a calliope on the top deck. An incredible thing. We're going to have it running in there. And through the other doors in there, we have a Mesconga sloop of friendships. We have a couple of Herreshoff 12.5s. We have antique beetle cats, and we have a whole passel of Optimus prams, all going in that building, plus a lot of other displays. Our foundation is in now, and as soon as spring breaks, we're going to be building that building just as tight as we can go, and it should be finished pretty well for occupancy by the middle of the summer. So we're looking forward to that. But I want to tell you a little bit about this SCIF program that we have. Sail Kids for Free. This program we started last year. We had 60 kids graduating from a week-long class of sailing, and it is the most wonderful thing, one of the greatest things we've done, I think, for the community, because it's a free sailing class, wonderful free sailing. We take these kids from 6 years old to 14 years old. We stick them in the boats. The first day they come, they don't know anything about it. They don't know what a rudder is. They don't know what a centerboard is. Don't know how to rig these boats. Look at them over here on the left, the little tiny kids down there, and they're racing their sails and they're learning how to put these boats together. These are Optimus prams. They're only 6 feet long, built like a cigar box, very safe. They have flotation in them. The kids are all in masks and life jackets and all the rest of that, so it's not very dangerous. We put them on a tether. They go out there and they figure out what the rudder does and what the sail does. Then we let them go and push them away, and they sail on Tuesday, their own captains, each in their own boat. By Wednesday, they're turning the boats over, righting them up again. Thursday, they're really learning how to go out and around buoys. And by Friday, we have race day. And this is on the bottom there, race day. All the kids in their boats out there going as tight as they can to beat the other guy. It's a wonderful thing that we've put together for our community sailing there, sponsored by the Mid-Coast Sailing Center and by your donations. Oh, your donations, of course. This is the way we're working. We promise you we will double your gift. If you give us $100 for get a kid out on the water, we're going to double it by putting another kid out on the water. We now have 22 Optimus prams and in our fleet, and we can put twice as many kids out as we did this last year. And we will double it for each of whatever donation you make. $200, we'll put 4 kids out. $500, we'll put 10 kids out, all the way up to, if you want to do $1,000, we'll put 20 young ones out in the water and teaching them how to sail. These kids don't know anything about it. They get so enthusiastic, they're over the top with excitement, and by golly, they even forget their telephones when they get out there sailing that boat alongside their buddy in the other boat, and if they can't get faster than them, they run into them, whatever works, you know. That's the program, SCIF program, Sail Kids for Free, and your donations will help keep it going. So we're going to go on now with our program tonight. Keep us in mind. Come down to the Sail Power Steam Museum. We open May 1st, and check us out. We have a wonderful museum. Plan to spend at least a couple hours just for a cursory look. We've got a great program tonight. Captain John Foss. Captain John Foss, there he is with a great smile on his face. Captain John Foss, you ever see a happier guy? There's one of Eve right there. He's having the greatest time of his life sailing that vessel. And he exudes pleasantry, right? Capt John Foss, incredible man. I met John Foss back in 1968. If you saw the program on the Bowdoin, well, I'll say if you didn't see the program on the Bowdoin, go on YouTube and see the program on the Bowdoin. It's a good program with a lot of history in it. Well, anyway, in 1967, I got to talking to McMillan. The poor vessel was down in Mystic and it wasn't in very good shape. So I said, Mac, I said, how about we take it to Maine and we'll try and make it into a museum? He said, go, get it, take it to Maine, Jim. So I did. We dragged it up here in 1968. And the word got around, and I don't know how John Foss got roped into this, but he was in Bowdoin College. Is that right, John? You were in Bowdoin College at the time.
Yeah, I tried to talk the dean into taking the vessel for the college, but they were far too conservative to do that.
Well, we brought it up to Maine here and put it up in the slipway there. The first time she'd been hauled out of the water in 10, 12 years. And we did her bottom. And I got this young fellow called John Foss to come up and he donated his, I didn't pay you, did I, John?
No, you hardly ever did.
Oh, thank goodness. Anyway, he came up here and he went to work on that vessel. I gave him the dirtiest jobs ever. My God, he grabbed a hold of the dirtiest job with alacrity. He went at it with a great smile on his face. And I could just tell he was the perfect guy for this kind of job, this kind of work. Look at his feet there, all the pieces and parts of that poor old vessel all rotted away down in Mystic down there, and we're getting ready to redo all of that stuff on her. John worked his tail off for us there. It was really wonderful because I didn't have time to brush her up like that and paint her out and make her look good. So John did it for us, and it was just fabulous. But he didn't take too much of that, so he decided he better go in the Coast Guard. John, you better come in here and tell us about the Coast Guard, because I really don't know very much about the Coast Guard.
We're on Ocean Station here, and this is about the most dangerous thing we did, which is in mid-ocean exchanging movies. This is the 378 class. That thing will go 0 to 29 knots in 90 seconds. It's got gas turbines aboard. Of course, with 300,000 gallons of fuel, you can only do this for about 3 days, and then you run out of fuel. So the last one of this class, which is the one that the picture was taken from, is being decommissioned next month in Kodiak, Alaska. She's been in service 49 years, and she can still do 27 knots.
Oh my goodness. So you were in the Guard for 4 years.
Yeah, and 4 years, 3 days, 2 minutes, and 15 seconds.
Great. Okay, and then I understand you wandered around looking for a vessel.
Yeah, some of these are before, some of them are after. There's the Coronet in Gloucester when she belonged to the religious group in Shiloh in Durham, Maine.
Right.
And then that's the replica of the America built by Gowdy and Stevens for Rudy Schaefer.
Right.
And that's 1967. And at the launching, there are a bunch of smart Alecks there, and they asked for other kinds of beer than Schaefer. And sure enough, the bartender had other kinds of beer. And then some of the locals thought it'd be interesting to see what Maine maritime students looked like wet, so they threw them in the harbor. And then the next one over, that's the steam tug Baltimore. And that's taken from the schooner Bowdoin when Jim had her down in the Chesapeake. That's when we found that she drew 10 feet instead of 9.
How did we find that out, John?
Well, that's because I got the lead line soundings wrong, and I said there was 4 fathoms, and there was somewhat less than 2, I guess. Nice to have a soft bottom there, though.
Yeah, very safe. Chesapeake's very safe.
Yeah, and then
we called you 4 Fathom Foss after that, I remember.
Yeah, luckily I've forgotten that. And then lower right, if you're ever in Damariscotta and you wonder why there's a place called Saltwater Farm, that's what's left of the Lois Candage, which is a
I'm surprised you didn't buy her.
Yeah, well, she was too complete, you know. But
I see.
down the bottom middle, that's the America, and some yacht designers in New York area had worked up the correct plans for her, and they made a few mistakes. They made the gaff jaws so close together that they fit nice when the sail was set, but they wouldn't fit to the mast when the sail was down. So it took a little work. And then,
Well,
then
they also
lower, yep.
they also built her keel up with kiln dried lumber.
Yeah,
And
they
when
built her. Yeah,
when
they
she
built her in a hurry.
soaked, yeah, when she soaked up, of course, and everything swelled up, they couldn't steer her. They had to take her out of the water and redesign her afterwards. Well, anyway, yeah, and go on.
Okay, the lower left is one of the vessels I looked at. That's the Sylvina Beale when she was still working for the Peacock Canning Company, and she was home ported in South Portland. And the first time they put radios aboard, she was had a load of herring that she got off Matinicus, and they called the plant in South Portland, and the guy said, "You better bring those herring down here." And the guy said, "Well, it's kind of rough." And she had two 671s in her by then, and
Wow.
they got her to Portland. And when the manager came in the morning, he told the crew at the factory to take the hatches off. And he noticed some of the rails were missing and the bulwarks were stove out. It had been a little rough in the passage. And they took the hatches off, and all they saw were eyeballs and backbones. The herring had all been macerated by the rough weather coming down from Matinicus the night before.
And then?
Well, there's some advantages being in the service. They take you to nice places. Like we got to go to Cuba in August and St. John's, Newfoundland in March. And so upper left is the Archie F. Mackenzie, and her cutoff stern is visible in the top center.
Mm-hmm.
And she was built in Shelburne, Nova Scotia in about 1923. And she was a nice schooner, but she was, by this time, this is 1971, and she's a motor coaster. So her stern got a little punky, so they did the economical thing. They sawed her stern off. And then to the right, I don't know who that is. It's either the pilot, which would...
No, it's the Roseway.
It is the Roseway. Yeah. That's when she was still in service in Boston.
Yeah, she had lost her masts there in a gale of wind off of Boston on station one time, and they put shorter masts in her, and they put these great iron cones over the top of her masts. That's what you see there, those great gobs of iron on top of the mast. So she's not going to lose her masts again. That's really a very strong item then.
And then the bottom there, that's a lovely Canadian schooner named the Norma and Gladys. And I don't know if you can see it, but she's so big, she had two pilot houses, one over the old wheel box and then a more modern one. When Newfoundland saw that the province of Nova Scotia was doing quite well with publicity with the Bowden, they decided the Blue Nose, they decided that they better do that too. So they took the Norma and Gladys and fixed her up and wanted to use her as an ambassador. That lower left is a picture of her. Again, this is in St. John's in the winter. And then that last little picture, middle left, is the foredeck on the Archie F. Mackenzie with all her heaving and hoisting gear and her companionway and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then
this is
you came down and found a shipyard.
Yeah, this is the North End Shipyard. And Doug and Linda Lee had the Isaac Evans going, and we were looking for a spot, and I was looking for a place to rebuild a schooner. And we got together, and the local lime company owned this charming piece of property. And they, for some reason, which we could never quite explain, agreed to lease it to us. They didn't want to sell it to us, but they leased it to us. and our rent was basically fixing up the place. And then after a few years, they sold it to us. And we've fixed up the railway and put it back together. That little building to the right is a smokehouse. They used to smoke pollock and herring in there. And it looks a little different now, but I don't know. I've got a picture of that.
Well, that was an amazing purchase.
Well, the price was, yeah, there's the three principals.
Yeah. Like the one with the clean shirt, I guess he does the bookwork or something.
No, the one standing next to the wire does the bookwork. I like to watch. It's kind of, we've been partners for pretty close to 50 years now. 50
years. Wow, that's pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. And
this is a picture we just ran across of the Louis French.
Yeah, at Southwest Boat Corp.
Yeah, you can't miss it. Luckily, they put up a sign.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I'd never know otherwise. So she was in for maintenance, huh?
Yeah. This picture, we tried to research it the other day, and in the background, there's a sign that says Little Abner. Well, the comic strip Little Abner started in 1934 and continued on until fairly recently. And so it's after that. This particular vessel has been working in Maine in one permutation or another since 1871. And her birthday's coming up next month. She'll be 150, which is going to beat any of us.
Yep.
Although Jim's got a good start on it.
Yeah. So there she is under sail. I guess both those pictures are around 1900.
Well, the one on the left is probably after she had an engine put in. That's an awfully big wake considering how level she is.
Well, yeah, that's true.
But that's a big rig for her. And also her shear straightened out. That's probably, it could be as late as 1920. The one on the right is when she was owned on Mount Desert. That's probably around 1910, just before she was rebuilt using a water-powered sawmill in Somesville. This is about the time that this vessel, at about age 40, had the garbage contract for the Astaku Inn. They took the trash out and dumped it out in the bay.
That's good. That was the way we used to get rid of all the garbage in those days. Now, tell me about this one on the left here. I don't understand that picture.
Well, I don't know about the coloration. Somebody's tinted it rather creatively, but this is after she'd had power put in her. She was owned in Rockland in the 1890s, and she was owned again in the area. And she belonged to a coal and lumber company in Vinyl Haven. This is frozen in the ice in Vinyl Haven sometime, I would say, in the late 20s. Mm-hmm. It was one of those winters where you could walk from the mainland up to the islands.
Wow.
And to the right is a picture I don't remember I've ever seen. This is the fleet of the Seaport Navigation Company. And the one on the left is the Duke. Both of these vessels were engaged carrying, and the one to the right is the French. Both these vessels were engaged in carrying tin plate to the can factory in Eastport. And they also carried cased goods, sardines. Most of the canneries, particularly down east, were hardly accessible by road. So everything came to the factories and left those canneries by water, whether it was the fish, the cans, the cannery workers, the mustard, and the case goods going out to be freighted.
Yeah. Hard-working old boats then.
Yep. It was an advantage being just under 65 feet. They avoided, even in the 30s, some of the Coast Guard and international regulations.
Oh, yeah. And then
this is the result of a road trip with Alan Talbot and Doug Lee's father, Maynard, Bud Lee, and I went to Eastport I'd inquired of the Seaport Navigation Company if their historic vessel, the Louis French, might be for sale. And they said, well, no, why she was due for a Coast Guard inspection since she went international. And they said, she'll be beached out. You can come look at her. And it's a good thing she was beached out because almost any semblance of a sailing vessel was gone by this time. But you could see her underwater body was that of a coasting schooner. So there she is on the left on the beach in Eastport when the tide went out. Same on the right, you get a little view of her. And the bottom picture is of her hold, and evidently the crew had a few liberties with what they could do with the vessel, and they apparently have a scallop drag on board. So she had one sailing mast left. It still had wear marks where the mast hoops had worn, possibly half a century before. And they freighted all the stuff for the canneries and for the can company. And then in the off season, they'd use her for one thing or another. They carried Christmas trees with her and so forth. So they kept her busy.
Who was this man anyway?
You know who the one on the right is? The one on the left is Louis R. French.
Look at John here.
Well, I believe him. I don't believe the one on the right.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, you can't interview the guy on the left, so you're stuck with me. But yeah, Louis French lived on Rutherford Island down in South Bristol and Christmas Cove. And he had 3 or 4 sons, and 2 of them worked for the gammage business in South Bristol at the Gut. And those 2 gammages, Albion and Menzies Gammage, built all kinds of vessels from the 1850s up to about 1900. And they built fishing schooners and little coasters. They even built a few steamers. And after a while, like a lot of independent thinking carpenters, which explains what most Maine carpenters are like, they said, well, what the hell, we could build one of these for ourselves. And so 2 of the guys who worked for Gammages started the construction. They named the vessel after their father, whose picture is on the left, and obliging him to buy the first set of flags for the vessel because he was the sponsor. A third son, a third of the French brothers, was the first captain. And I met with the French family in the early 70s after I bought the vessel and proposed to rebuild her. And they buttonholed me about a couple of things. Could I tie a Matthew Walker knot, and how did I rig up dead eyes and lanyards and so on. And after they decided that maybe I was for real, they told me a few stories, one of which was the total cash output for the vessel being constructed was $18. And somewhere they said they had the bill because the blacksmith who did the ironwork refused to take shares on the vessel for his contribution to the endeavor. And he charged him $18. So,
wow.
So the picture on the right is at the shipyard once we'd started rebuilding the vessel at the North End Shipyard in Rockland. And there's a picture the family provided of the grand old gentleman himself. Boy, you really cleaned these pictures up, Jim.
Well, I tried. But there you go. You drug her out with a couple of bulldozers.
Yeah, when we hauled the French, we didn't really have a railway put back together yet, so we had to hire a couple of bulldozers to do the work. After a while, they said, we're not bringing our bulldozers down here for an hour's work. So then we had to finally bite the bullet and put in an old steam winch converted to electricity and a real railway. But yeah, so we hauled her out, and then we decided we'd move her ourselves using jacks, which took about a week and made us all very tired and somewhat ill. Well, this is the fall of 1973, and some of the local boat carpenters came down and looked, and one of them, who was one of Jim's most loyal friends and carpenters, Earl and Quinn, said, "Well, you got her hauled out, but you'll never get her rebuilt."
I believe it.
Yeah.
I'm amazed.
Not much to look at.
I'm amazed at what you got accomplished anyway.
Well, Doug and Linda had just done this with the Evans, so we had there was quite a lot of hands-on experience into doing it, and
Mhm.
I helped them some with the Evans, and they went partners in rebuilding the French with a great deal of effort, enthusiasm, skill, and expertise.
It's still amazing when you look at what you're faced with.
Oh. Apparently, their idea of rebuilding this vessel over the previous century was just to put in more frames.
Yeah.
They finally ran out of space, but when we tore the inner lining out, the ceiling, there was just frames everywhere, and a lot of them were had trunnels in them. She'd originally been trunnel fastened, and there were all kinds of wood. There was oak, hackmatack. I would venture to say there might have been a bit of spruce here and there, but
And rusty bolts.
yeah. And the most recent rebuilding before we got her was done in Meteghan, Nova Scotia, where they had a plentiful supply of ironwork, apparently. And one of the specifications for the owners was that they wanted to be able to drop a 1-ton roll of tin plate for the can factory into the hold with that electromagnetic crane they had at the railroad pier in St. Andrews, New Brunswick. And sometimes quite literally on the low water, they just dropped it. So she was put together quite substantially. There was a guy up the street in Rockland named Pete Harper. He'd worked with his father on the schooner Bloomer, building the Rockland breakwater. And Pete came down and shook his head, looking at the size of the stuff that was in her and what we were putting back in. And he said, well, if you can't find any passengers, you can always get a job knocking down wharves. I think over on the right, there's a picture of putting things back together a bit after an extensive amount of tearing out.
What it should look like.
Well, it's what we figured it ought to look like anyway.
I think that's a wonderful picture. You should really frame that and hang that up in your home. That picture of her stern. Wow.
Scary looking.
Scary.
Yep.
And the foredeck, that's pretty scary too.
Yeah, well, as often the case, you say, well, I can save a little bit, but luckily we had a barrel stove in this temporary building and another barrel stove in the shop. So we were able to, as they said when they rebuilt the Blue Nose 2 in Lunenburg, they said, we took a great deal of the old vessel and converted it into energy. That is to say, we burned it.
Well, would that old soggy stuff burn even in a wood stove? I mean, in a barrel stove?
Well, if dried peat will burn, this stuff would burn, but it was pretty rank. Upper left is Doug's design for a proper shear clamp. This vessel was constructed the old style with interlocking lodging knees between all the deck structure. And we had a few hackmatack knees, but basically we went back and put in a heavy oak combined shelf and clamp, which was essentially turned out to be essentially a laminated oak 10 by 10, which might have been why they thought we could knock down wharves. We went through a lot of electric chainsaws. The lower left is cutting out the old cargo floor, which, as you observed, it's all fastenings in every direction, and it was all fitted directly to the ceiling. So there was no slack there. You drop something, it would hold it up.
Wow.
There's the partner impresario himself with his favorite hand tool, a chainsaw. And this is of a time when pine was 10 cents a board foot and oak was 12. And that's delivered. And it was a source of some embarrassment in the modern context, but Doug's trimming the end of the brake beam, which was a piece of oak about 20 feet long and 6 inches thick and about 22 inches high. And that was a noble piece. It was a little questionable on one end, but it was so good that we couldn't see not using it. And so we got a lot of stuff sawn by Newbert and Wallace, which was a going yard that built fishing vessels over in Thomaston. And Herb Newbert wouldn't take money for the decking that I'd ordered until he dried it for a year and planed it. And then that was more, it was like 20 cents. Anyway, you get an idea of the sweep of the vessel there, that left-hand picture. There are the rails on, you get an idea, she's a real coaster with a very round bluff bow. And that's Linda Lee with one of her many caulking mallets, caulking the deck we'd laid. And on the right is the summer when Linda and Doug were off sailing, and I had a couple of guys working with me, and we were caulking the bottom. And that was the summer of, I don't know, 74 or 75. And it was about 100 degrees. And it wasn't any cooler under that boat, but she had a lot of bottom to caulk in that heat.
Yeah. Wow. Finally get up on deck.
Yeah, well.
You're still tearing out.
No, this is actually throwing her back together. And that's me trying to avoid work and pointing out something for somebody else to do.
Yeah.
And the fellow there that I'm pointing out to is also the guy who designed and constructed the glass pyramid for the modern entrance to the Louvre in Paris.
Really?
And the guy in the lower left became an air pilot and did a lot of private piloting work. And he also helped build he oversaw building a post and beam house on a little Spruce Head Island out in Penobscot Bay more recently. Mm-hmm. But we had a lot of schooner crew members come up on their break from school at Christmas time or in the spring, and go hammers and tongs at putting this old vessel back together.
So it took you 3 years, was it?
Well, I had to work during part of that. So, geez, where'd you find these pictures? Yeah.
I've been scrounging around.
Yeah, we're pretty scroungy then. Yeah, I guess this must be the French because it's certainly not me, what I look like now. This is Herb Newbert of Newbert Wallace showed us how to make covering boards. So you could make them a little oversized in one piece and drop them down over the tops of the frames, the bulwark stanchions, and then wedge them so that you had a watertight structural member there that would form the edge of the deck. Mm-hmm. And top off the topside planking. So basically most of what you see there is new work. We did save, in the right-hand picture, we saved a couple of deck beams, which are still in her, with her document number. Those are her mast partners. And they're pine, which you wouldn't really think would be right, but one of the visitors during the rebuild in the summer was a guy who should know about such vessels. It was Harvey Gamage, because his grandfather and great uncle were the guys who probably designed this vessel in 1871. And he did two things I remember. He showed up and looked at the big jointer that Doug and Linda had brought up from Bath. And he held up his hand, missing a couple fingers, and said, "You got to watch out for them buzz planers." But he also, I said, you know, it's funny that the top sides seem to be mostly softwood and the bottom is oak, and there seems to be some yellow birch and beech. And he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "that's typical hardwood on the bottom, softwood on the top sides." So it was nice to be a sufficient novelty that some people would come by and tell us what the heck we were supposed to be doing.
And then came time for the windlass.
Yeah, and another advantage for the Coast Guard and having friends in Maine. This is right near the Coast Guard yard in Baltimore. There was a wrecker's yard there. This was a little schooner built in New York State in the 1890s. And she had a very nice windlass. And I got hold of the guy who owned the yard. And for a small amount of money, he would agree to part with it. And it just fit in the back of my Volkswagen Beetle. And I drove it to Maine and put it in Jim Sharp's chicken barn out on Route 1 in Lincolnville. And then it went on the French, and it's still there, although I understand it could use a little bit of work.
This looks like a painting, doesn't it?
It's more, it was, no, it's just somebody's improved the picture a bit, but this is the kind of photography I had in 1971 or two.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
2 buildings.
Yeah, now we're getting into the red Baudelaire age of marine construction photography. These are 2 spruce trees that came from the Pinkham Lumber Company in Ashland, Maine. They were 70 feet, and they made the first new masts for the Louis French. This is at the North End Shipyard in probably late winter, 75, 76. You see the bowsprit from the French sticking out of the right-hand building. And on the left hand is the schooner Janie Riggin, which was completed the next year in 77. And it was from the time those 2 spruce logs arrived to the time they were worked into masts was about 10 days. And we replaced them after a couple of years because spruce just made us nervous as masts, although they certainly were good enough in the 19th century to last a long time.
Busy, busy yard at that time.
Yeah, we didn't know any better.
God. And there's the rigging. I
Yep.
guess she's getting ready to put her overboard there, huh?
Yeah, there have been a lot of vessels rebuilt and repaired there, but as the owners of the yard, we take a very kind approach. We provide unwanted recommendations, and we refuse to work on other people's vessels. But if you ask a question, we'll spend an hour explaining what we think you ought to do. Luckily, most people don't listen to us and do what they want.
Uh-huh.
But also there's a stern reminder of what the Rockland waterfront was not that long ago, because in the back is the reason we could afford the shipyard. That's a fish rendering plant. And our first years operating schooners from there, when we get in from a trip, people would say goodbye, give us a hug, and run for their cars to get away from the horrible stench.
Rockland by the smell.
Yeah, it's now gone from gritty to pretty.
That's right.
Yep.
So then came time to get you overboard.
Yeah, this is April 1976, and we hired a building mover because we'd had so much trouble moving her by ourselves with a couple of railroad jacks when we first hauled her out. So here she's ready to go, and Roland Bragg's a builder from Nobleboro, a mover, and Roland always looked for a challenge. So he came up with these aircraft dollies. I think they were condemned landing gear from airplanes, DC-6s or something. And he put those under a cradle, which we'd built, and rolled her down the beach. But he forgot about tides, and the tide came in before he could get the dollies out from under her. So we had to go down and knock some blockings out from under her so she'd float. The picture on the right is obviously she could use a bit of trim, but you got to remember that the chain and a lot of the heavy gear wasn't there and the tanks weren't full. But there she was, finally back in the water. And we hoped that she looked a lot like she did in 1871. And as a continuation of the seat of the pants operation, here she is, her first season. And I like that lighter colored gray, and I like the fact that she at this point has sheer, although those great heavy quarters you could see in construction tend to adjust that sheer over time. The mainsail on her here was originally made for the Stephen Taylor sometime in the 50s. And it's a Budsy Hawkins design. It had some curious yacht kind of features that generally didn't work. And she was that sail was a little too big. We could never get the boom off the table. And there just wasn't enough hoist left. So when we tacked, we had to switch the quarter lift so the boom wouldn't hit anybody. The foresail and staysail are from a sail loft in New Jersey that Doug Lee's father, Bud, had gone into sometime when they were buying the Richard Robins in the 60s. And Doug said that he said, I'd give you $100 for that sail. And the sailmaker looked at him. He hadn't had a customer since 1944. And they said it wasn't necessary to go sailing anymore with those oyster boats in Delaware Bay. And the guy said, "You're not taking one sail, you're taking all of them." So that's why there's 3 reefs in a foresail. You got to remember in oystering, the speed you pull those dredges over the bottom is critical. So you're always adjusting your sail area to keep the speed optimal for bringing up oysters and not having that dredge skip over the bottom. The staysail required a lot of attention. The jib, which is out of sight, is another Jim Sharp contribution. And that is an old jib off the schooner Bowden, that also fell apart, but it was enough to get us started.
You can't get anything out of Jim Sharp that's worth anything. You know that.
We've all learned an awful lot. Don't kid yourself.
Beautiful. I give you credit, though. You were underway. You did it, and I don't know where you found the money to do all that, but I know it took a lot of energy.
Well, it didn't cost very much.
It didn't cost very much. So, the happiest day in a man's life when he buys a boat, 1886. That fellow looks pretty happy there, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's my brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Yeah. The best deal I got from him was his sister, but yeah, he wanted to get into this after he'd got through the University of Maine, so there he was. He'd worked for you. He'd gone to Halifax with you on the Roseway in 1984. Yeah. So he had his license. I figured he might as well do it.
Yeah, I guess he worked. He worked several years on the Roseway.
Yep. Yeah, and that was
Is Danny aboard here? Danny, are you there?
I don't think so.
No.
I think he's waiting for the movie to come out, Jim.
Oh, well, I don't blame him. Yeah, very good. I don't know when this picture was taken. Probably that's not 1986 at all, but.
No, it's a little bit later.
I happen to have it to put it in there.
Yeah, Danny had built, when he got the French, it had a very nice Whitehall type pulling boat on the Port Davits. That met a sad and unfortunate end. And he replaced it with what he called the Peas Pod, which is a modified cross between a pea pod and a dory with a fairly wide bottom. And it's a terrific people mover, and it still serves that purpose today.
Was that the dump boat?
No, he built it new. But yeah, upper right picture, there's Dan looking very youthful with a fairly short beard, and in that picture in a cameo is Benji Mendelwich, probably the foremost marine photographer of our age.
Good. And then you wandered around Gloucester waterfront and you fell in love with another vessel.
Well, I thought a bigger vessel would be another challenge. This is a harbor scene by a fellow whose name I can't pronounce, but he did a lot of harbor scenes in Gloucester in the 30s and 40s and even more recently.
But it shows the way a sword fisherman's rigged up.
Exactly. Yeah, it might have been the vessel that we're about to move to here, the American Eagle, built as a schooner named the Andrew and Rosalie, but they had these 4 topmasts, but it wasn't for sailing, it was for spotting swordfish.
Right.
And these vessels tended to be anywhere between 60 and 90 feet. And it was a very elite fishery because this is the last harpoon fishery in the country on a commercial basis. And other vessels coming in and reporting their fish landings was how many 1,000 pounds of whatever. But these guys, when they came in and were reported in the monthly fisheries landings in the Atlantic Fisherman magazine, it's how many fish, because these swordfish they bring in were several hundred pounds. And it was also a fine weather fishery, unless you had the misfortune to encounter a hurricane out south in Nantucket, which did occasionally happen.
And you said the Rosalies went dory trawling in the wintertime.
Yeah, Andrew and Rosalie did. I think the Roseway actually went sword fishing some after she finished up her yacht career.
Oh yeah, no, I meant the Rosalie.
Yeah,
not the Roseway.
Yeah, this thing. Yeah, which will bring us to try to figure out who we're talking about here. This is a vessel built as the Andrew and Rosalie, named after the captain's two kids. And then there she is in frame. This is on a wharf in Gloucester. This is sometime the winter of 29 to 30. She's built by the United Sail Loft. These were guys who were what they called outfitters. And an outfitter was the company that took a completed vessel, but not really complete, from the yards generally in Essex, Massachusetts, and corrected the mistakes, put the rig in, set her up, put in the stove, loaded the coal or firewood, put all the gear aboard, and actually finished the vessel so that she would be rigged to sail. And their turnaround time was often, from the time they received the vessel time she was ready to go, was 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
And they didn't fool around. And every so often, these outfitters in Gloucester would say, I don't know why we spend all our time fussing with these guys from Essex. We'll just do it ourselves. So United Sail Loft tried building a few vessels, but as outfitters, about the time this vessel was fully framed out, you can make out, the shape of her right there as she's coming together. They were rigging and outfitting a schooner that had been launched in March 1930, named the Gertrude L. Thibault, which was a much more notable vessel. The Andrew and Rosalie is a humble little nondescript, 90-foot vessel that just kept catching a lot of fish and working through a number of owners until finally she managed to stagger to Rockland to be rebuilt. But she proceeded from this construction site to launching. And here's the United Sail Loft. The principals of the United Sail Loft were very good at making good sails. And this is a time when I would bet they were making sails by hand. They may not have had much in the way of big sewing machines. And she was built in a very odd way, this vessel. They built her right on the wharf there in Gloucester Harbor. And when they got her close enough to launch, they put some big timbers under her, laid her down on this bilge, and then jacked the timbers up and pushed her into the water. So it was quite a novelty. And here it is. This is June 2, 1930. They haven't put the name board up on the rail yet. There's kind of a light spot in this fuzzy picture. Luckily, the correspondent for the Atlantic Fisherman for Gloucester was also the secretary of the United Sail Loft, so he got a full-page article about the launching. And looking at these launch pictures carefully, you find the only living creature that isn't wearing a hat in these pictures is a dog in one of the pictures. So there they're jacking her up, getting ready to throw her in the water. And if that isn't an abuse test, dropping a 90-foot vessel about 10 feet into the water, I don't know what is, but.
Can't imagine it. Can't imagine she'd clear that shoreside bilge.
Yeah, well, they probably didn't care.
Well, then she went fishing and converted her for dragging and.
Yeah, she started out as Jim, as you mentioned earlier, she would go sword fishing in the summer. The guy who had her built was named Patrick Murphy. He'd been in Gloucester since about 1900. He had his first command in about 1902. And these fellas are fishing. This is 1980. So here's the forecastle at the time. There's a bunk. There's the mess table. There's a radio. And that's the cook. That's Gus right there. And Gus didn't want to be the cook, but his brothers told him he was going to be the cook. So he was the cook. And when I got the vessel, there were 3 brothers working the boat. There was Gus, John, and Joe. And there was another brother who retired to Florida. You know about these people who retired to Florida.
Yeah.
But
heard about them.
You know, they'd use the boat hard and put her away, but they weren't making any money on her. So
well, now that's that A-frame over there. That's for dragging.
Yeah, and yeah, when Ben Pine had bought the vessel from the Murphys in 1938, in 1941, as the war was going, and many of the fishermen in Gloucester were from the maritime provinces or from Newfoundland, which wasn't even part of Canada then. They would start renaming vessels as a patriotic gesture. So the Andrew and Rosalie became the American Eagle in 1941. This is 1980. This is getting towards the end of her fishing career. But in 1945, they'd send her down to New Bedford and put a real trawl winch on her and put that steel gallus frame there and all that stuff, and used her as a dragger, an Eastern rig dragger. And she really wasn't designed to do that kind of heavy work. And that winch weighs, because I got a number of what she weighed from the junk dealer when I finally got rid of it. It was right around 4 tons. And wow. All that heavy gear on that poor old vessel. She was intended for fishing with hooks or harpoons, not dragging chain and junk all over the ocean bottom and then piling it up on deck. Yeah, that's Gus with a cigar. He not only is the cook, he also ran the winch. And in the left-hand picture, that's Joe with the white hair. I don't know who his guys are, but when I got her, I said, how do you anchor this thing? And they said, well, you just hook the anchor onto the trawl winch and just throw it overboard. So, you know, they by that time they'd rebuilt the rails. The main cabin was still pretty much original, but it was just full of old engine parts and empty cardboard boxes. It was and there were all kinds of nets on the vessel. They had a chain drag for flounder. They had all kinds of panels of various size of netting for general ground fishing. They had a fine mesh net for shrimp. You can see in the right-hand picture, they've got the net run out and they're about ready to drop the drag doors to hold the net open as they go around in a big circle. I think they said she could hold 100,000 pounds of fish if they could catch them. And one time when the fish stick plant was really busy in Gloucester and they were buying pollock as to wherever it would come from, they made 3 trips in a day. They brought in several 100,000 pounds in one day. They made 3 trips because the fish were just in the outer harbor. So they go out there, catch the fish, bring them in, unload, go out and get some more. But towards the end of it, they were basically using her by the day. There's Gus finding dinner and what they just brought aboard. There's a nice flounder about to become a victim for the frying pan. So there's Gus again. So, well, we still have a forecastle up there, but now it's we had to replace the old shipmate stove. It just, after 50 some years being used hard, it wasn't restorable. So we got one from Lunenburg. There she is, still is the Andrew and Rosalie, or as they say down home, the Andrew and Rosalie. The bowsprit's been sawed off. She's probably hauled sometime after Easter when the price of fish drops, because it's always high in Lent. And she's there to get painted. It looks like they painted the bottom, but they haven't bothered with the top sides. It was kind of a fine line. here. This is a picture by a guy named Giles Todd, who wrote a book called The Last Sail Down East. He was quite an academic student of the vessels that persisted despite modern inroads. And here's a profile of a late fishing vessel, fairly deep forward, what I think some people unkindly called old slabs. Essentially, when you're painting this vessel, the bottom, the side goes all the way to the keel. There's really no bottom. They're deep, they're full, and they're heavy. And but they, you know, a lot of freeboard, rugged, plenty of power in the sailing rig, and during most of her career, plenty of power in the engine room. And they could go out year round and put up with almost anything. This is, we've skimmed over the tearing her apart and sticking her back together. This is what we came up with after about a year or so of rebuilding. We've reframed her where necessary. We've replanked her entire topsides, replaced the stem, the stern post, the rudder trunk, all the stern framing, all the deck beams, using various reference points as to where her mast partners were. And we're having a heck of a lot of fun just going to town, putting her together, getting her ready to take her back sailing. And this doesn't happen in a vacuum. That by the time we were done, there were 6 different schooner captains who apparently couldn't find anything else to do in the winter working on this. Building spars, building the rudder, doing the ironwork, cleaning up after the guy who did the ironwork.
How do you coerce them into doing that?
Chasing the caulker around with pitch. But this is looking aft. If you look towards the bottom of the picture, you see a lot of the original ceiling, the lining was good enough. The frames were fine behind it. So we just refastened everything. But all those knees are the late type of knees. They're not grown. They're just actually sawn out of wide timber. And this is typical construction after about the First World War, where you have a broad shelf, a laminated hardwood group that's all bolted through. You can see a bunch of square nuts on it that go through to the frame heads. And then these sawn knees tie that to the framing, the ceiling, the clamp, the shelf. And it's a lot less scary than looking at the pictures when we tore everything apart. They're really pretty disgusting. But there are some details here that are worth noting. The beading on all the deck beams. The idea is that when you bang your head on the deck beam over your bunk, you look up and say, "Oh, isn't that a nice beating?" Well, now it doesn't hurt as much as it would otherwise.
Yeah. Carrying that on the shelf too. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're getting close to taking this temporary building down. This is a building that was originally constructed for building the schooner Heritage. Then another group came in and put the building back up for building a short-lived schooner named the Dayspring, which is a wonderful idea, but just met with some misfortune. And then we stuffed the American Eagle in there, and then on the right, the building's finally down. The engine's been dropped in, so now we can put the cabin top on. And there's our longtime cook Stephanie paying the seams after they've been caulked on the cabin top. And again, this sort of thing doesn't happen in a vacuum. I've added it up, and I've had several hundred crew members over the last 30 some years, and they all put their heart into it. They never really get out of it in the way of money, but then none of us do. But it's
true.
The crew, and perhaps more importantly, the people who make it possible, the guests, the people who've been supporting vessels like this for decades, or the people who just showed up because they thought it sounded like fun and they know nothing about it. It's the only way at this point that these vessels can honestly earn a living. These aren't museums. These aren't some kind of ersatz vessel that was dreamed up by some fancy architect as a sail training vessel that doesn't look like a vessel. These are the real deal. And none of us individually deserve any credit for this at all. The vessel deserves the credit. The guests who become family deserve the credit. The crew deserve the credit. The owners just happen to get the mud thrown at them, but they're really not the responsible ones at all.
Incomparable John Foss. When I hired you back in 1968, I thought you were the real deal. You were going to do well in this thing. And I taught you everything that I knew. And then you turned around and you did it twice better. Better than I ever did.
I doubt that very much.
Oh, you did. I had a little yard there, and we were banging away on those boats and trying to put the boating together. And you came to Rockland. You got a full-fledged shipyard with a railway and everything else. You did twice as well as I did.
I didn't do any of it by myself, Jim. You know that.
And then you turned around and you got a Gloucester fish boat. I had a Gloucester fish boat we were trying to hold together. I had it only 24 years. You got it rebuilt the whole thing all over again, and you're going to have it for 50 years. You twice as long as I. So there you go. You did that twice as well.
Well, you know, when the experienced observer says you have a lot of courage, it means you're really foolish.
Yeah. There is a fine line between courage and foolhardiness. That's true.
Yeah, there is.
Then I grew a little mustache, and you turned around and grew a mustache twice as big as mine.
Yeah, well, you always had the Don Amici mustache.
Well, there was only one thing, John, that you never did, that I outdid you on, and that is I walked with a limp. And
I did that. And wait a minute, I did that too.
Not for all these years, not all my career, I walked with a limp. That's all part of the ambiance, you know, a captain that walks with a limp. Oh boy, that's great stuff.
Yeah, well, I remember when on the Adventure, you'd have us doing all kinds of crazy things like painting the mastheads underway. And we'd look or the anchors, and we'd say, well, I'm sure those mastheads are good enough. Jim's never going to go look at them. And then you'd kind of smile in your own little sneaky way and say, just hold the wheel a minute. And you go up hand over hand, go up there, and look over everything and come down and look at us standing there back by the wheel with our mouths open. And you say, well, I guess that's pretty good, but you missed a spot.
Yeah. They found a holiday, I think, probably a few times there. Yeah. Well, anyway, coming to launching days, huh?
Yeah, and there's my dear long-suffering wife with our son Sam, who now works for Google on her back.
Really?
And we're ready to break the bottle on something. As part of those captains who did all the work, Ronnie Hawkins did the rigging, and he didn't think that you should have to stick chain or extra shackles in something. He just wanted stuff to fit. Everything fit, and
yep.
He didn't brook any incompetence at all.
You needed a bowsprit, huh?
Well, yeah, nothing lasts forever. We sadly find that out. So all these nice Douglas fir spars that came from the West Coast on a railroad car, most of them we've had to do some work to. So Peter Green up in Lincolnville had found a nice pine tree up behind Lincolnville Beach, and we thought it was time to replace that bowsprit.
Big enough tree.
Yeah, so there's the pine tree. I got to buy the whole tree. I'm still using up some of the sideboards, and there's the truck from the mills delivering. That's a 16 by 16 inch timber, 38 feet long. And then that's the best side of it there on the right. And that's that it has very few knots and has no sapwood. And I figured a good piece of white pine is better than the Douglas fir that they ship out from the West Coast. As the fellow in the mill says, you know, if they send big timbers of western fir out this far, you can bet that it's not as good as the stuff they cut into flooring out there on the West Coast. So it's a nice piece of white pine. And that one, actually, I've started the cut for the taper down at this end. You can see there's a saw curve on that. So that's in a building that was a side project for 10 winters. That's rebuilding a little tugboat that named Cadet, which I finished up as a retirement project, but then I didn't retire. So it's in better hands now. And Mark Clayton up in Hillsborough and Camden is using it and taking much better care of it than I ever would.
Good. Well.
Oh yeah. So here's the new bowsprit in, and then we're abuse testing it over there on the right. So it's
yep.
And then here we are abuse testing the rest of the vessel.
Yep.
And
Yep.
she goes along pretty well. It'd be nice if she was 2 feet wider, but that's not what Patrick Murphy wanted. So here we are.
Well, you're doing pretty well. You're winning all the races.
Well, not here. The people in Penobscot Bay, the schooner community up here are pretty cagey sailors, but you get down to what's now represented in Gloucester, and there are a lot of sail training vessels with hired captains, and many of them are running a winter season, and they haven't hauled yet. And it's all that business about what's now become age and treachery overcomes youth and ability, or something. But there have been some times that she goes along nicely. We've had a couple of long runs, like 50, 60 miles in a day on a beam reach, on port tack all day long. And that's the kind of day you go, this really is a pretty good idea. You know,
Yeah.
it's really rather fun. And we're all enjoying this, despite the fact that the cabins are small and the heads are tight, and you know, that nothing's really very soft or comfy around here, but the food's great, and the crew couldn't be better. And here we go.
And the passengers are fantastic. Whoops.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I've got to update that. We haven't. It's not really right. We haven't won 10 of those races. We've gone to, oh Lord, 28, 30 of them, something like that. We've won
Really?
12. We've won 12 of them.
Really? Yeah.
So we're 1 for 3, but I think, Jim, you were 2 for 2.
I know, but I had an advantage over them.
Yeah, you sure did.
I was fortunate enough so that I knew more about sailing my boat than they knew about sailing their boat.
Yeah, well, that's what one encounters with these company boats that don't have steady skippers.
It took me 5 or 10 years to figure out how to sail that boat, but by the time 24 years was over, well, I knew pretty much about it. But National Historic Landmark, 1991, pretty good, John.
Yep, that was a great program, and I think when they hired Jim Delgado to do that survey, they didn't realize that when he came back with his reports that something like a quarter of the vessels he'd surveyed had already disappeared. And, you know, they said, wow, a vessel boat built in 1930? What's the point of that? Well, we got houses that are 300 years old. They go, yeah, but houses don't sink. And the upkeep on something in the water, I mean, the minute you launch it, it's trying to sink on you, no matter how beautiful it is. And you just can't, you can't let up. You can't take anything for granted on these vessels.
That's for sure. Yeah. So that was one of the races there.
Yeah, there's the American Eagle, the Roseway, and I think the Brilliant from Mystic Seaport. Yeah, this is the change in command here. This is Joe Piscatello, me, and Gus the cook. And somehow Joe got the nickname of Haddock Joe, although he didn't know where it came from. I think somebody fed me a line on that one. But this is this is why we really go to the races, is to get all the hardware. Well, you get the thing on the left is a lovely two-handled solid pure silver cup. It was awarded for some very lovely high income yacht race on Long Island Sound in the early 1900s. It was repurposed, as this vessel has been, as the Dr. George Nichols Cup. And that was for an award for somebody who'd done a lot for sail training or something. The thing on the right is what ends up in the main cabin, which is the plaque for the race. But I think Joe and Gus were pretty pleased with that. I don't know that they'd ever, in all their years fishing, that they'd ever ended up with a trophy for anything other than getting a nice pay stub from the fish dealers down at Fulton Street or in Boston at the fish market.
Hey, John and Jim, I just wanted to interrupt for a second. There's been a couple conversations going on over in the chat section. I don't know if Paulette, if you're there and want to say this in person or add to this, but Paulette wrote, my grandfather, Captain Joe Piscatello, was very happy that you took over the American Eagle and preserved her. He loved his boat and was always very proud of you when you brought her back to Gloucester Harbor. Thank you for preserving her.
This is a perfect time for that, Robin, because here are the three brothers.
Yep.
So this, I'm
There
sorry,
you are.
excuse me, Captain. This is Paulette. So this picture you have showing here is, that's actually, no, I'm looking at it and it kind of looks like my dad, but that is my grandfather.
Yeah.
He just looks a lot like my dad.
Yeah,
But
well,
yeah, my grandfather was very proud of her and he was very happy when you purchased her because he always said he had two choices and he couldn't deal with the other choice, which was sinking her out in the harbor.
yeah. No, then finding this vessel was like a little bit like the Three Bears. There was another vessel on the same dock, the Serafina II. She was lovely, had a wonderful history, built in Rockport, same place as the little schooner Surprise that's in Camden now, but kind of small. Would have made a good day sailor, but the timing wasn't right. And then there was one named the Evelina M. Goulart that was involved in a lot of unpaid bills. And then there was the American Eagle. And these three fellas, which is, we're looking at Gus, John, and Joe Piscatello. These guys, they had no illusions that this vessel was some kind of amazing treasure that should be sold for a great deal of money. They'd done their work. She'd done well with them. And they were happy to see her go at a very fair price. When we left Gloucester, one of the wives, and I think it was Joe's wife, but I couldn't be sure, came down to see us off, and she said, "I just want to say goodbye to my bread and butter." So,
Yeah, that sounds like my grandmother.
yeah. And
Very
of course, in
nice.
the process of getting this vessel done, I'd lost about 40 pounds. So that skinny looking guy next to these three healthy fellas is me.
Oh, well, we better move along here. It's getting late.
Yeah.
There, you're trying to win a race there, setting the sails on the small boats.
Yeah, that's right. I got to set all sails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where don't you have a handkerchief you can put up somewhere?
Yeah, we tried that. It didn't work well. We tried awnings, but that didn't work too well either. But
Yeah, we tried that too.
yeah.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah. One of the nice things about going to Gloucester every year is you cross a lot of banks and grounds and Saturday night ledge and two-dory ledge and all that stuff. And that's not only good fishing, it's some of the fishermen out there turn out to be whales. And it's really fun. And then we've made a dozen trips to Nova Scotia. Here we are sailing off the docks in Lunenburg.
Lunenburg, not Halifax.
No, that's Yeah, Lunenburg. Yeah,
Yep.
and we've tied up at the Fisheries Museum of the Atlantic there and listened to the twice daily sermon about the blue nose.
Yeah.
And I stand in the back and raise my little hand and say, well, one of Ben Pine's vessels is right out back there and she's still sailing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's a nice.
Showing the yachts a few things here.
Well, yeah, it's the races in Gloucester turned into kind of short run races, but they're still fun, and it's great to be down there. There's no port that is more welcoming than Gloucester.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. The amount of effort they put into a weekend festival is just staggering.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody gets involved.
Yeah. Now you said you were crossing over some shoal water here.
Yeah, I've done that, but no, this is just with a shallow reef in, so it must have been a good day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there she is, ready to go back in the water last spring, about a year ago.
You put a piece of plank in her, I believe, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, well, a lot of her bottom is probably original. I mean, we inspected it and refastened it and recocked it and so on, but generally we haul out, we put a few planks in her every year. It's like putting money in the bank.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very pretty.
That's leaving a dog bar breakwater there on the right, leaving Gloucester.
Mm-hmm.
And this is trying to stay ahead of the Alabama, which is a wonderfully restored pilot boat from Mobile that Bob Douglas rescued and eventually rebuilt. It's a McManus design, somewhat modified for power, as many of these vessels are.
She has two engines, doesn't she? Two propellers.
She's got a noble engine room. Just like on the Bowden, the engines have the best cabin in the whole vessel.
Yeah.
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 Our engine, we stuff under the sole in the main cabin and try to forget about it.
And that's the end of it.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was a lot of fun.
What will 2021 bring us, John, huh?
Well, another 3/4 of a ton of lobsters, I hope. And
It's going to be pretty expensive, they tell me, but
oh, it's worth it.
yeah,
It's only money.
That's right. Well, thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, anything they want to jump in and ask questions, it's a good time to do it.
I would like to thank both of you very much.
Well, thank you for listening. And anybody else want to chime in and thank John Foss for his dissertation here?
Thank you, John. We'll see you in June down in Booth Bay Harbor. And
You
thank
betcha.
you, Jim, as well.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, John. And Jim, thank you too. It was great.
Thank you, Ralph.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you. Come and see us down at the Sail Power Steam Museum sometime. When we get open, it's going to be a great summer and we've got a lot going on down there. And if you want to, this is my memoirs, my book. If you want to donate to our skiff program, take these kids out and put them in little boats, get a kid sailing, and we'll give you a free book, free signed book of my memoirs. And you know, some of it's even true. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, John.
The next Zoom is coming up in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be the Louis R. French.
Yay!
We're going to have a whole lot of captains on. I hope, John, you'll join us again for that one, because we have new pictures there, different pictures. So come and join us for that one in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Zoomers, very much for coming. Captain Jim Sharp signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good show.
Thank you.